Hey everybody, Steve Burns here from Criminallusion.com. A very good friend of mine, John Eves, sent me this photograph, and he's photographing models in his studio, and his question to me was, he really wants a viewer to be attracted to her eyes. How would I edit this so that we actually, bring our focus to her eyes, to her personality right about in here. So several things I'm going to adjust. I'm going to actually edit this as if I was the one that shot this and I want this to be in my portfolio. How would I go about editing this entire image? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer, and let's go ahead with a Command J, and let's get in close to her eyes. Okay, now I'm noticing, first of all, is that there's a little bit of a problem, and that it's slightly off focus or motion blurred. If I look at the edge of her cheek here, there's probably a slight little horizontal, camera shake going on here as well. So, all right, we used to have in previous versions of Photoshop before 2022 that under the filter menu, and we go over to the sharpen menu, we used to have the camera shake option. We don't have it anymore. According to Adobe, the changes in the Mac processor, the changes to graphic cards and processors in general, there's incompatibility with the old technology of camera shake, so they took it out. So I found something I thought was a nice little alternative, and that alternative is called, right here, and let's go ahead and bring up the web page, and it's called the Focus Magic. Is very cool. All right, so you can download it for Mac or PC. Focusmagic.com. I'll make sure I'll put a description and a link for the video. This is $95. If you download it, it's a trial, and I think it allows you up to 8 saves. I've already did a few. So I'm running out of my my privileges for using this as a freebie, but check this out. All right, so I've got the program open here, and let's go over to Focus Magic, and you can see I just hit the yellow folder, went and opened the original JPEG file and started to play around with these settings. Okay. So what you do is you focus, click on the eye in this case, and if I zoom in using the magnifying glasses, it'll zoom in or zoom out where you have actually selected to focus on. Over here on the left hand side, you have your filter. You can choose your focus, your mixed motion blur or fixed motion blur, increase your resolution, despeckle, defocus. My first thought was to go to the defocus. I want to get in closer so we can get a better view of this. So I'm going to try the focus, and then I'm going to click detect. The blur width, it's going to detect it automatically, and let's see what happens. If it doesn't, I'm going to click it up and up, right? And just to make sure that I have everything reset back to default, I'm going to go back. I will open up the original JPEG file. It might be the wisest thing to do here. Open it up. There it is. Now I'm going to click on her eyeball. It automatically sees it. Now that's better. All right, that's the original. Now if I zoom in closer, we can see the softness of the image. On the left hand side, focus, and hit detect for the blur width. It did a pretty darn good job. I can also play around with other options. In fact, let's go ahead and get even closer. I can come over, instead of focus, I can try to fix motion blur and determine the motion blur. Now if I come over to the side here, we can see that there's probably the motion blur is happening horizontally, right? So I'll go back to the eye. Let's see what it does. So if I go to fix motion blur, 0 is the angle, and this, now we can't click on it and move it around. We actually have to put the numbers in here. whether it's a 45-degree angle or a 90-degree angle, you have to determine that. So if I type in 90, we can see that move up and down. But my blur is actually going left to right, so I'm going to keep it at 0. Now I can determine the distance of the blur. So if I click it up, there we go, to 3, to 4. All right, I'm going to just do it as many times as necessary to get the best result as I can. If we go too far, you can see what's going on, right? So that's not going to work. So we're going to go back 6, 5, let's see, 6, 5, 4. That looks pretty good right there. Let's actually bring it down, hit the minus. All right, and now I'm going to apply this effect to the entire image. Right up here, you have a little stoplight icon. Click it. You have 7 free images left before I need to register. Okay, so as I mentioned, I was playing around with this, and it applied it to the entire image. Now, if you're happy with it, fine. I think I'm going to do it again. So I'm going to go back. This time I'm going to go to focus and see what I get, and then bring up the detect. It's auto detecting 1. That seems to be better. I like that. If I go up higher, it really starts to, break apart the color details. I'm going to stick down to 1 and then click the stoplight symbol again to apply it to the entire image. There. Okay, that works. Once done, File, Save As. I'm going to save it not as a JPEG, but as a TIFF file. I've already played around with this several times, so I'm going to call it Girl 1 Focus 5. And then target Save. It's done. Let's go back to Photoshop. Let's open up our new file. File, open, and let's go get our Girl 1 File Focus 5. All right, so at this point, I'm liking this one here much better. Okay, this is much, much better. So I'm going to discard the other. I don't really need the other at this point. I'm going to make a executive decision, and I will Command W and get rid of that one and just work on this newly corrected image. All right, let's duplicate the layer, Command J. Now, I'm going to work this in a way that I think is going to improve the entire image. And I want to place her on her own layer. So on my second icon down, when my tools bar is double layer, we've got an option for quick selection. I'm going to target it. Right in the options for quick selection, I'm going to select the subject. Let Photoshop do the work for me. And I'm going to sit back and relax, and it did a pretty darn good job. It missed just a couple of small areas, so I will zoom in close and correct it, like right over here. I will paint, and using my quick selection tool to add to it the same thing down here for her dress, paint these areas in. That looks great. I'm going to move around to the side and see what else I've missed. Probably these areas right in there. Good. That's great. I'm going to inspect these down here. Add that to it. This tool is learning. It's guessing exactly what it is you want to keep and what you want to discard. So I'm going to paint everything around her hair to make sure everything is added to that. Okay. And add in the her hand right down, the little fingers right in there. Looks good. All right. Command 0. Let's place this on its own layer. Command J. There. Now, I'm going to make this a smart object. So right click, create a smart object. Do the same thing for the one below it. Right click, make it a smart object so we can work non-destructively. All right. Now let's go into Adobe Camera Raw for our top layer. It's a smart object. Command Shift A is a shortcut for Adobe Camera Raw, or Filter, Camera Raw Filter, Shift, Command, or Control A. We're going to click it, and we're going to go edit this. So one of the problems I'm seeing with this image is that we have too much darker value, too much dark mid-tone value here. Okay, we can see it throughout the dress. We can see it throughout the edges of her hair, the shadow areas. We can see it in her eyes, which is preventing us to really focus our attention on the eyes. The viewer is going to miss the eyes because there's too much in the shadow. So if I go to my shadow slider, I can add more shadow or pull out that shadow. Okay, this is nice. So I'm going to pull out just enough to open up her eyes, and also to open up some of these areas in the dress. In addition, the deeper dark black areas, I'm going to pull those out too to get more detail in there. That's quite nice. All right, now we're going to keep working this out a little bit. I'm going to go to my highlights, pull those down just a little bit so I can get some detail in some of the brighter areas of her face. And I think it's important also to pull out some of that saturation. Too much saturation in her skin tone. So go to the saturation here, pull that down. There we go. There we go. Quite nice. Now, to add more of the natural skin tone, add the magenta for the color balance, right? So pull away from the green. Add a little more magenta. That's nice. That works right about like that. We can always add more magenta later on, but this works fine for here. All right, now at this point, I really want to pull more of the darker values out of here, but it's difficult to do at this point because we can't do it all in one setting in Adobe Camera Raw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click OK. Okay, I don't want to get greedy and try to do everything in one sitting. I can build up on top of this. Okay. All right, now, not bad. All right, so before and after, before and after. All right, so here, if you look at her hair, and let's go before, I might want to bring back the richness of her hair from before, just a little bit. And one of the ways I can do that is probably just take away the effect of this adjustment layer. So if I simply click on the mask for the adjustment layer for the Camera Raw setting, let's get in a little closer. Take a look at my brush here. I'm going to hit my B key for the brush. I'm using a soft edge brush, right? So if I right click here using a soft edge brush, and this soft edge brush is going to have, I'm using my stylus, my Wacom monitor, my Cintiq, or if you're using a SenseLab, that's just as fine. But my transfer, I have pen pressure and for both flow as well as opacity. Your flow and opacity is at the top here, is being controlled by pen pressure, and it's showing the effects right down here. Press light is a light effect of paint. Darker, press down harder, you get a darker effect of paint. Once you set these things, make sure you save it. Go to your hamburger menu, new one. Make sure include tool settings is unchecked, because you want to save this brush to be utilized for all your Photoshop brushes. If you use include tool settings, it'll only save it for that brush that you have selected. So capture brush preset checked, the bottom one unchecked. Name it what you want. I'm gonna leave it the same. I'm gonna click OK. Where is it? If you right click anywhere in your image, it's always the very last brush at the bottom. Click anywhere, that goes away. Okay, now that I have this set, I'm going to close it out. I don't need it anymore. I'm going to go to my adjustment layer for the Camera Raw. Okay, and I'm going to paint with black. And what that does is it brings back the original hair. And I'm only, you know, putting it where I want it to be placed, only painting it where I want it to be placed. So I'm adjusting my brush size. Okay, and it's only, and you can be sloppy about this because it's only being applied to your object on its own layer. Okay, pull it on back. That looks great. All right, if I want to go to the edge of the hair here and bring back some of that richness, you can. And which is going to help aid to focusing on her face. Having a little bit of a darker area in here is going to just get you to focus. That looks good. All right. Looking good. I'm going to pull it on back. I think that's going to work. Now, the next thing I want to deal with is this iridescent effect in the dress. You can see the colors in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add an adjustment layer. Instead of making a smart filter applied to my smart object, I need a separate layer with a separate mask attached to it. So I'm going to come right down here to the bottom of the layers panel, hit the black and white half circle, and I have up here an option for hue and saturation. Now, what hue and saturation is going to allow me to do is add more saturation to the image or completely take out all the saturation in the image. Okay, I'm going to take that back to 0. But what I want to do is I want to take out this cyanish bluish iridescent effect out of her dress. I want to leave all the other colors untouched. So in the master, right up here at the top, you have your custom, and then you see the master file, right? If I click the master down, I can target what color I want to affect. I'm going to say I'm going to affect the blues. I can test that out by pulling the slider and see the blues go away or come back. Okay, so I'm going to go and I'm going to adjust the saturation for the blues. Pull the blues completely out, and all the other colors are untouched. And you have yourself a black looking dress. Right. Now, if you take a look at this, there's almost a slight cyanish or greenish. I'm going to try cyan and see if I can pull that out this way. That worked. It's real subtle. It's right in there. I'm going to go to green, see if green will work. Pull that out. That worked. That helped a little bit. It's really subtle. You can probably barely see it. And we have a nice, clean black dress. All right, I'm going to do something else to improve upon that dress. I want this adjustment layer applied only to her. Right now, it's being applied to the entire image. Everything on top and below the layers. Alt or Option key, place it in between the two layers. That will make it your clipping path, as it's called, so that it affects only her and not anything else. I'm going to add another Camera Raw filter to the actual smart object. Why? Because I've got a lot of little blocked up detail here that I want to open up. And I believe I can do that with a second Camera Raw filter. Yep, we can add on additional Camera Raw filter smart filters within this adjustment, within the smart object. So, Command Shift A. Let's open up the Camera Raw filter again. There it is. That's Command Plus to get in close. Let's go to my the dress, and let's go to shadows, and let's pull those shadows up even more. Ignore the color in here because we've already taken care of that with other filters, utilizing the adjustment filters. Now at this point, with that pulled up, I'm going to go to the blacks and pull those up a little more. That's good. Now we need to take the highlights down so that this is going to be more richer, like black. So go to the highlights and pull those down. See? Now go to the dehaze, and that's going to add some richness to the extreme dark areas. clarity is adding contrast to midtones, which I don't think we really need in this case, because we're going to go to the highlights for the highlights and add contrast to the highlights, and that's done with the texture slider. Pull that on over and look at that, much nicer. Go back to I'm looking at the highlights. I'm going to go to the whites and see what I can do here. Yeah, I can pull down a little bit more in there. And that dress, I might be able to pull the exposure down just a little bit. There we go. Now if I click OK to see what it looks like in the photograph. There. Much nicer. Much, much nicer. Alright, so the problem here is this. Is that it's affecting the entire image. That is not what we want. So if we turn this off and turn it on again. So we did the right thing, but what we need a lot more control. So I'm going to click and hold, drag this to the garbage can. Okay. And this is going to take us back to our original image. What we're going to have to do, and unfortunately is there's no other way to do this, is that we're going to duplicate this layer, Command J. We're going to place it on top of our original. Okay, so before and after, you're going to see nothing happening because it's an exact duplicate. Then we go back and we add the Camera Raw in here. Okay, so Command Shift A. So you get to learn that we can't always pile up filters and get what we want, because we don't. And the reason being, if I'm going to cancel this just temporarily, is that every filter that we place in here, if we go back to the original layer or even the one we're working on, we see the Camera Raw filter, but each of these filters that's going to pile up on top of each other does not have their own individual layer associated with it, or layer mask associated with it. It only gets one layer mask for all of them that we added in there. So we need more control. All right. So we're going to go ahead and add another adjustment. Not adjustment, but another Camera Raw filter. And we're going to do what we did last time. Bring the shadows up, like so. Bring some of the blacks up, like so. Go bring the highlights. Go ahead and get in a little closer here. Bring those highlights down. All right, so it looks more black. Go to dehaze. Add that on in there. Let's go to texture. Add that in for the brighter areas. I think some of the whites we brought down a little bit. There we go. Now that's going to work. We're going to say no, don't cancel. Let's go click OK. The address looks much better. But what we're going to have to do is this, because the adjustment layer for the hue and saturation is below. I should be able to bring that on up. Let's see. Let's bring it on up and see what happens there. That took away that bluish there. And we can still attach this to her alone. All right. So this one here, this is for her. This first one's for her skin. Second one's for her dress. So give her a layer mask, Command I, and then what we will do is we'll paint in the effect with white. Okay? And get rid of, make the dress exactly what we want. Paint it in with white. There we go. Okay, so that's going to work quite nice. It's a little bit of that blue in there that I'm going to have to take care of with a separate adjustment layer. But we know what to do at this point. Okay, so if I want to deal with that little extra blue, what we can do is just go ahead and add another hue and saturation. Just add it on right on top of that. And let's go ahead and target our blues. And let's take that saturation out. Let's see what we can do. There it is. Did a much better job. Okay. Now, let me close out the properties temporarily. Here's my adjustment. I'm gonna make sure it's applied just to her. Now that adjustment is affecting her entire body. Now, if you take a look at our original one, Option click on the mask. This is what we want. We want this applied to the dress only, right? So all we're going to do is hold the Alt or Option key and just drag it on top of this one. And replace the layer mask. Yes, and there it is. Right? And we can do the same thing for this one. Since we want it on her dress only. There it is. Okay. Clean. A lot better. All right, so let's go ahead and edit the rest of her body. Her hands, her legs are a little, and her ankles are a little bit brighter than her face. I don't want that. So let's go ahead and edit that next. I'm going to come right at the top. Again, we're editing this here. That's for the dress here. So what we're going to do next is we're going to edit her body. Add another adjustment layer. And this time we're going to edit curves and just bring down the tonal detail. Look at her hands. Get it down to about where we might want it to be. Okay. And then we'll work with this. So I'm going to put the properties over here so we can see them. And then Command I on that mask to invert the effect. And we're going to make sure that this is going to, we don't really need to make it a clipping path. I guess we could make it a clipping path. All right, so I'm going to move that bar right over here so it's easier to see. I'm going to paint with white. But remember, this top one is the dress. I'm going to move this right down on her body. This is her actual body here. Okay? The top one is just the dress. So I want to keep that in mind. So now let's go ahead and edit on her hands with white. And what I will do is I will make it a clipping path to her body so I can be sloppy with this. So I can just gently start to bring down that tonality in her hands. Now that my eye is going to go to her face and not her hands. Let's go to her legs. We want the same thing with her ankles and legs. Darken these down. And those shoes can probably use a little richness as well. That might help us. Make a bigger brush. Let's add this into here. And just paint the effect where we want it to be. So I don't want any of the highlights on her body to compete with her face. That's the whole goal. Don't want them too dark, but I'm going to bring it on down, hit the X key to switch to black, and I can take it away in some areas to kind of soften up some of these shadow areas so it's not so much contrast. Alright, so pull that away here a little bit. There we go. So just being sensitive to it. And again, if you want to, you can always target that layer and give it a slight Gaussian blur to soften the effect, to blur the effects, like using pastels and you're pushing pastels across your canvas, right? So you can add a slight little Gaussian blur to it to kind of blur it in there and then click OK. All right, now let's go ahead and take a look at the whole image. Much, much better. Let's deal with the eyes. Let's get into the eyes. Let's improve upon them. All right, we want the focus to be on the eyes. Several things are wrong with it. The white's a little bit too much shadow in them, and the eyes aren't accentuated enough. Right near the pupil, there's a beautiful cyanish color tone to the pupil area here. All right, it's kind of washed out a little bit because we add a little brightness. I want to bring back some of that. So let's go and add an adjustment layer right above her person. Right here, this layer here, right above her person. That adjustment layer is going to be another curves. This is how we're going to do color balance. Right over here is my curves property. I want to add some cyan. She has these beautiful cyanish gray eyes. So if I drop this down and go to red, the opposite of red is cyan. So if I put a dot in the middle and pull it down a little bit just to give enough, that's about all we need, just that much. Make sure this is a clipping path to her person. Option click, put the cursor in between, and then Command I to take away the effect. Now utilize your brush to paint with what color? We're going to paint with white. Hit the B key for the brush to access the brush, and we're going to add in that blue right there. That brings back that beautiful bluish, cyanish bluish eyes. Done. Now let's add some more contrast to the rings of her eyes in here. So let's get in closer. We're going to add another adjustment layer, once again to her person. Curves, but this time take the curves and give it a layer blend mode of multiply. That darkens it automatically. We don't have to do anything. Make it a clipping path to her person, right? So you can see what I'm doing here. Let me unclip it. And if you pull it down, you can see how the adjustment is affecting everything, background and her person. So Alt-click between the adjustment layer and her person. See, it won't affect the background, which is the reason why we placed her on her own layer. You have so much more flexibility. So if I get in closer, Command I on the mask and inverse it. And what we're going to do is we're going to get in close, get the brush smaller, and paint with what color? You've guessed it. Black. All right. You're going to enhance this. Enhance that with black. Paint with white to make this black in here. If we pull it back, you're going to be careful with how much you paint. You got to be real sensitive about that. So I'm going to undo a lot of those. Okay. There we go. And I'm going to make the brush going to be a lot more sensitive. To make the brush smaller. And move the brush in the direction of the actual texture that's there. There we go. Much better. Much nicer. Okay, let's go to the other side. Do the same thing. Small brush. Because if you look at the strands of those nerves in there in the eyes, they're moving in and out in this fashion. Okay. We can go to the pupil and darken it up. Right? Maybe not too dark. Let's pull that back a little bit. Maybe just not as dark as I had it. Just a little darker. Pull it on over, go to the other side. Just a little darker. There we go. Okay. There. Now, your eyes going in there. The last thing is the whites of her eyes. Let's bring those out. Once again, another adjustment layer. We're not getting greedy. Another adjustment layer. Go to curves. Change the blend mode to screen. Does it make it brighter automatically? Make it a clipping path to her person and not apply to everywhere. There. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to inverse it. Command I, take away the effect. Okay. And we're going to paint that effect only in her eyes. Now remember, the whole idea is to get volume. You get that curved volume in her eyes. So we're going to pull out some of the shadow, but we're going to add a little more brightness in here to make it look like lighting is falling on the tops of her eyes, and then it falls off into a shadow on the sides of her eyes, right? So we're going to pull up this a little bit, pull out these highlights. Again, make it look like it's like a ball. See how that comes out? So if I come back before, after, before, it's real subtle. I'll get in a little closer. All right. So before, after, before, after. And these brighter areas help contrast against the darker outline that we created. Nice. Go to the other eye, do the same thing. We're trying to create, a circular shape, just real subtle. Then we can bring out a little bit in here. Keep it subtle. There it is. Okay. We might like to bring out more richness in her lips at this point. Once again, what I'll do in this case, for the fun of it, is I'm going to add just a brand new layer. We're going to adjust this layer to what's called, or change the layer blend mode to color, because we're going to determine what color. So if I take my brush and say I want that deeper red color that's behind her lips, Alt, while I'm on my brush, that becomes an eyedropper, tag it, the foreground color becomes that color. Now I can come back in here and decide that we want a little more of a pure red like this. You can do that if you like. And all we're going to do is, because it's in color mode, it's going to avoid the lights and shadows, and it's going to tint it the color that we want. So I'm going to just add a little extra richness to her lips. All right. It's like adding lipstick to your model. Bring it up a little higher, bigger for the bottom portions of her lips, and then we're going to add that detail. That's going, there we go. That's going to attract more attention. Now, oftentimes we're putting some type of a makeup on the sides of her cheeks. We can also use that to paint that on like so. Or bring it on to the side here, just subtle. I'm not a makeup artist, so unfortunately, I'm winging it. Okay. All right. So much better. I think the last thing I'm going to want to do with this image is actually deal with the whites. So that is the background, right? Remember we made the background as its own smart object, which is below the person right there. That smart object there. So what we're going to do is we're going to just come in here, give this Command-Shift-A, which is Adobe Camera Raw. And we got a little bit of a greenish background here, so I'm going to bring in a little magenta to counter the greenish, give it more of a pure white looking. There we go. Go to my highlights, add more detail. All right, add more detail to the whites, and then go to the whites themselves. Pull down the extreme whites. Pull that on down. All right, so we're getting detail on the highlights. Now, what I'm going to do next is just bring up the exposure just slightly. Right about there. Now, if I go to my texture, remember texture is adding contrast for the highlights only. We got shadows, midtones, highlights. Your clarity adds contrast to your midtones. Your texture adds contrast to your highlights. So if we get in closer, pull this over to the right, see? That pulls that texture without blowing out those whites. Let me pull the texture. That's extreme. If we pull it to the right, to the left, see it softens up back there. Pull it to the right, it pulls out the details in those curtains and the details over here in the couch. It's only affecting the background. So we're seeing the original image as it was before we did modification. So click OK. There we go. All right. This is looking good. Looking good so far. I'm thinking probably adding a little more, taking the highlights of the dress down a little bit more. It's just a little bit too bright. I want that to look black. So I'm going to go back to the dress. Remember, the dress is right up here. Okay. And let's add, here's my thought process, is simply duplicate this layer once again, or better yet, I can merge everything into a single layer. So everything I've done so far, hold down Command or Control, Alt and Option, and Shift all three modifiers together. Go to E. It places everything in one layer without touching your other existing layers. Right click, convert to Smart Object. Okay. Now from there, remember, we're only doing this to edit that dress, right? So Command Shift A. Go to Adobe Camera Raw. Our first thought is to go to those highlights and bring them down. Let's make this dress look black. So go to the highlights, pull it on down. Right? Pull it on down just a little bit. Go to my my dehaze. There we go. There we go. That's what we want. Click OK. There. All right, now give this a mask. Now, if I give it a mask now, it's going to be white by default. But hold down your Alt or Option, click on the mask, third icon from the bottom. There. You get a black mask, saves your time. Increase the size of your brush. Paint with white, which is what we have here. Okay. Let's go ahead and get rid of the properties. We don't need to see this here. And we're going to add, there we go. We're going to add in our effect where we want it. All right, it's not perfect, but I think you guys get the point. I think you all are getting the point. Treat your portrait as if it's a painting. Work like a painter. I'm using a Wacom stylus, or if you're using the Sense Lab, that works equally well. And we can go to the shoes. All right, and we can bring in some of these details to the shoes. So if I want to, I don't want to be careful. I want to be careful. I don't want to go outside the shoes. I'm gonna. There we go. Bring that brush down and just deal with the shoes. Okay. Come down here and edit some of these layers. I think this looks great. All right, it's a good start. I'm going to go down to the bottom. Let's take a look at before and after. So Alt, click on the eyeball. Before, after, before, and after. I guess my other little issue is that she can probably use a little more pinkishness in the skin. I'm still thinking the saturation is probably just a bit much. So if I go down here to her body, let's go to her person here. And I think what I'll do is I'm going to go to the Hue and Saturation adjustment layer. Okay. Making it a clipping path to a person. And let's pull out some of that saturation overall. There we go. Okay. All right, and then from here, let's add a little more of that magenta, get a little more pinkishness in her skin. So I am going to add overall, let's go to curves. Go to the magenta, which is the green. Opposite of green is magenta. Pull out the green. There. That's nice. As you can see, it's affected everything because I didn't make it a clipping path. So Alt, click, there. That's better. Okay. You can decide on your own how much of that you want to add in there, but that's not bad. That's looking pretty good. Maybe a little more yellow in there, possibly. If that's the case, go back to my curves, and then go to the blue, which is the opposite of yellow. Pull the blue out and see how that looks there, just to give it some warmth. That works quite nice. All right, let's look at it before and after once again, to remind us how much work we've actually accomplished. Alt click, before and after, before and after. Okay, part of me wants to do this. After all that we've done here, I want to merge everything into their own layer. Command Option Shift E. Make it a smart object. Create the smart object. Let's go to Command Shift A for going to a Camera Raw. And part of me, let's see what a teeny bit of clarity will do. There. Yeah, that helped. Just a teeny bit of clarity did it. Let's see what I can do with some texture here. Yeah, that helps with the highlights just a little bit more. Okay, I want to be a little careful, but I think this works. Alright, this is done. Just about done. I want to do one last thing. With this applied, I'm going to duplicate this, and the reason being is because we have these neural filters, which are quite nice. So filter menu, go to the neural filters, and we've got a neural filter in here that's called skin smoothing. So I'm going to turn it on. It automatically does something. So I'm going to go Control plus to zoom in, pull it on down, pull it on up. So it's automatically doing some softening. Let me turn it off. See? And then turn it on. Beautiful softening for the skin. Really nice. So I am going to leave it there because I think that's just enough softening. That's all we really need. Click OK. Command 0 to bring it back to full view. Now we get some nice softened skin. And again, we want to focus on the eyes, right? So if we do before and after. Before, if you notice, the skin softening did not really touch the eyes so much, but if you want to ensure that it doesn't, give this a mask and paint with black just in the areas you don't want the effect to happen in, to ensure our focus is going to go to the eyes only. I think, right, so we want to take away that effect. That looks quite nice. Get in a little closer. Yeah, I think this is fine. Okay, there we go. So hopefully this is going to help John out, John Eves. hopefully you'll like this, and hopefully this was a little bit of an education for anybody else. If this is going to be something for my portfolio, I'll put the time into it to treat it like a painting, kind of work it all the way through. It's not perfect. It's not. I don't consider it complete, but I think you guys get the point. Is some of the workflows that's going to be really, really handy. So play around with this, see if it works for you. I'd love to hear some of your comments. I'll make sure I put the links in the proper links down in the description, so that you can actually go and play around with the Focus Magic. All right, $95. I think it'll be well worth it now that we no longer have our means of correcting focus blur. All right. So, all right. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I'm Stephen Burns from ChromaLution.com, signing off.